The Face of Judas Iscariot by Chamberlain. The Saturday Review, an American weekly book review magazine that began to be published in 1924, used to run a column called "Who Wrote This?" People could submit half-remembered stories to this column and wait for some other reader to respond in a later issue and say who wrote it, what the title was, and so forth. The present piece was submitted by a person named Chamberlain and was published in the issue of March 14, 1942. There was no response, so the original author remains unknown. An old priest told me this story when I was very young. I have since wondered many times where it came from. No one has been able to tell me. Centuries ago, a great artist was engaged to paint a mural for the cathedral in the Sicilian town. The subject was the life of Christ. For many years, the artist labored diligently, and finally the painting was finished, except for the two most important figures, the Christ child and Judas Iscariot. He searched far and wide for models for those two figures. One day, while walking in an old part of the city, he came upon some children playing in the street. Among them was a 12-year-old boy whose face stirred the painter's heart. It was the face of an angel, a dirty one perhaps, but the face he needed. The artist took the child home with him, and day after day, the boy sat patiently until the face of the Christ child was finished. But the painter still found no one to serve as the model for the portrait of Judas. For years, haunted by the fear that his masterpiece would remain unfinished, he continued his search. The story of the unfinished masterpiece spread afar, and many men, fancying themselves of wicked countenance, offered to act as models for the face of Judas. But in vain the old painter looked for a face that would serve to show Judas as he has envisioned him, a person botched by life, enfeebled by surrender to greed and lust. Then, one afternoon, as he sat in the tavern over his daily glass of wine, a gaunt and tattered figure staggered across the threshold and fell upon the floor. "Wine, wine," he begged. The painter lifted him up and looked into a face that startled him. It seemed to bear the marks of every sin of mankind. Greatly excited, the old painter held the profligate to his feet. "Come with me," he said, "and I will give you wine and food and clothing." Here at last was the model for Judas. For many days and parts of many nights, the painter worked feverishly to complete his masterpiece. As the work went on, a change came over the model. A strange tension replaced the stuporous languor, and his bloodshot eyes were fixed with horror on the painted likeness of himself. One day, perceiving his subject's agitation, the painter paused his work. "My son, I'd like to help you," he said. "What troubles you so?" The model sobbed and buried his face in his hands. After a long moment, he lifted pleading eyes to the old painter's face. "Do you not remember me? Years ago, I was your model for the Christ child."